Welcome to the EMT Pro podcast, where we deliver relevant EMS content from the field and the classroom each month. Episodes of this podcast can get you 1 full hour of CE through our partner, emt-ce.com, so head over there for more information. I'm your host, Steve Williams, and with me today is Dan and Holly. Guys, welcome back. Say hello.
Hello, Steve.
Hello.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good. We've got a really fun episode today. We've got a special guest from Danson Photo Art. His name's Daniel Sundahl, and he's got a pretty cool story. I'm excited to chat with him and hear more about it.
Yeah, he's got some good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very powerful. When you're looking at it, you're like, how is he in my brain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some incredible art that we'll link to in the show notes, and can't speak enough about what this guy's able to do. And before we get too crazy with it, let's get him on the phone. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today. We're extremely happy to have you and excited to chat about all sorts of different things that you're doing in the EMS field.
Oh, yeah, no, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So did a little bit of, I guess, research on you. And it sounds like, if I have my information correct, you're a 20-year firefighter paramedic in Alberta.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, I was a 20 years full-time paramedic firefighter.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in the process of retiring.
Oh,
Wow.
good for you.
Transitioning into a new career of being a psychotherapist.
Wow.
Specializing in trauma for emergency workers is kind of gonna be my new thing.
This is so amazing. Yeah.
You
Daniel, we're going to have a fun chat today.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I started doing the artwork as a part of my therapy. I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2014. And at the time I had a hobby, like most firefighters will have either second jobs or
Mm-hmm.
lots of hobbies and stuff they do on their days off, right? So I was into photography and was getting into that and taking pictures of my dogs and landscapes and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And was developed PTSD, kind of cracked my mind a little bit, went to the psychologist, and he says, Dan, let's try to purge and process these things that are happening in your head through your photography.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, that's a horrible idea. That's a terrible idea. I'm like, I don't want to think about this stuff. I came here, give me a pill so this stuff doesn't happen, and then I can just go back to work. That's what I was hoping was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of that's what I was expecting was going to happen, was he's going to do some witchcraft on me and I was going to be fine.
Yeah.
But he said, no, it doesn't work that way. You're going to have to work at it. And I'm like, oh, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I did that. He gave me some instruction. We kind of focused on one particular event, and I staged it. All my artwork is staged. None of it is of actual. They're
Mm-hmm.
based on actual calls, but they're not actual. I'm not there taking pictures during the call.
Sure.
Stage it with my peers. I photograph it, and then I digitally draw and paint on top of the photograph. And what happens when I do that is that I'm trying to recreate more what I felt from that event versus what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
I try to make it as accurate as possible, but I'm trying to recreate. And as I'm doing that, I'm using my frontal lobe to
Yes, you are.
process it while interfering with my amygdala, which is usually like, screw, let's just send the emotional response down and get everything happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know all that neuroscience stuff at the time, but my psychologist was right. And when I was done creating the art piece, after it takes about a week, then those feelings wouldn't happen. I would have the memory, but I wouldn't have the emotional response with them. And so he was right. It worked. And so I'm like, great. This is how I get better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did. It was never meant to share with people. I never meant to show other paramedics or firefighters. I never wanted to.
Yeah, it's
And
pretty
this is back in
private.
2014. Yeah, it's very private. And the first picture I did, there's a paramedic in the back of the ambulance with his gloved hands on his head, and there's a dead body on the stretcher, and there's a ghost there. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, this is too weird. People are going to think I share this, even with the people that I know. Even with the people that were in the picture, I didn't want to show them.
Mm.
So I'm like, yeah, this is too, I don't think they realized this is what I was going to do with it. And so I didn't for a long time. But I still had this Rolodex of emotions that I had to process. So I continued creating the artwork without sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very therapeutic for me. And then one day I thought, that first picture looks kind of it looks cartoony, like visually it's kind of a cool picture. And I thought I would share it just to see what would happen. Totally expecting to be, crucified for showing paramedics in a vulnerable state.
Mm-hmm.
Who'd you share it with
Gloved
first?
hands on their head. I just put it on my Facebook page, who I had 30 friends on at the time,
Right.
all who I knew personally.
Uh-huh.
Right. So it wasn't like I'm saying it out to the world. Again, this is back in 2014.
Yeah.
And so like I knew everyone that was on my Facebook page. And then that's when things totally blew up for me.
Wow.
Were you surprised
I
how
what I
much it
didn't realize-
resonated?
Oh, absolutely. But what I didn't realize was other people would look at that image and attach their own experiences to it.
Right.
I didn't think that was going to happen. I didn't think anyone had that experience. I thought I was the only one I thought I was broken. I thought that, I'm not as good as everybody else because these feelings are happening. I didn't want to share that with anybody. No one wants to share if they feel that they're, broken, that they don't want to, or not as good as everybody else. They don't want to share that.
Right.
But what I was surprised to hear that so many other people connected to it, which made me feel that, maybe this is more common than I realized. Maybe I'm not broken. Maybe this is just a normal thing that happens after seeing so many crazy things and experiencing so many crazy experiences, that this is a normal thing that happens in my brain.
Right.
And it's not unusual. And that made me feel great. Right. And that really that picture really changed my life, because now I'm traveling the world, speaking on podcasts like yours, and really sharing my story to others, which is really rewarding and healing for me personally.
Yeah. And the thing that I've thought about looking at your artwork was, like you mentioned, people are going to attach their own stories to these images because they're so, I guess, just powerful. And they do such a good job of pulling people who've been in those situations back to their own version of those scenes. And I remember looking at that you have one of I can't remember if it's a firefighter or if it's a paramedic that's basically just sitting on the back bumper of an ambulance, and the whole ambulance is like obliterated, like, and we've all had those calls where you yard sale the back of an ambulance because you're literally using so many medications and different procedures to try and do whatever you can to stabilize them for the 15 minutes that you have them. And the people, I guess I'm curious, what has been the reception of people who, have you ever gotten any feedback back from people who maybe aren't in the medical field who look at these? Because I can imagine people like that going, "Oh my gosh, this is really heavy. I don't feel comfortable looking at this stuff." But I'm curious if you've heard anything.
Yeah, I have. So I do. I recently had an exhibit. It was a public exhibit, and open to the general public. And they would look through it, and the most common comment would be that they had no idea that these are the things that some of us experience. Like they really didn't know. And I'm not a person that thinks, well, people should know. I'm like, no, people don't need to know the horrible things that we experience and the things that we see. Me personally, I don't think that's something that other people really need to know. They need to know when they call 911, we show up and we help them.
Right.
Personally, I think that's all they need to know, right? So when they come, they look at it, and then I guess it's good in a way that they understand, the stresses and the things that can happen to us potentially. So I guess that's a positive. But yeah, some of them were quite. It's really powerful to do that. The exhibit that I have, it's a large format exhibit, so the pieces are like 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall.
Holy
They're life size. So you stand in front of it and you're in it.
Yeah.
And it's quite emotional to go through that. But everyone, when people look at the images, I guess like any other type of artwork, they interpret it in their own way. And one image could mean something completely different for somebody else, even if you're not a first responder. If you have, a family member that has been involved in emergency services in some way, or they've had to contact them, then they look at it and reference that memory, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So it's less. I had the conversation with my psychologist because I was really worried that I was going to trigger some people
Right.
with the R work, because
Cause some trauma
when
or
I
something.
create it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have to be authentic. I have to be, in order for it to be a healing process for me, I can't censor it. I can't,
Right.
okay, well, I don't want to freak people out. I don't want to, like, it has to be real in order for me to have that recovery from it.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, when I do a presentation on the R work and post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
And I start with a disclaimer that, some of the pictures I'm going to show, although they're not real, they're all edited. It's not an actual scene.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't edit them. And based on your own experiences, they may trigger you. And if you do, you may feel free to stand up and leave. And most of the time on my presentations, that does happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked to my psychologist about it. I'm like, I don't want to trigger people. And he goes, Dan, it's less about the R work and more about their own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, the R work is making them process the feelings that are already there. So he recommended that it's a useful thing and that I keep doing it and that it's helpful. And usually when I do speak at conferences, I recommend, that there are some mental health support people there that, that if they see people leave, they can follow them and give them the support that they need. But I can't remember when this conversation even started. I started rambling.
No, this is good.
Just started going on a rant.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's easy to do, and
yeah.
we have we all three of us have our own stories with PTSD and different traumatic things we've seen in the careers we've had in fire, EMS, healthcare in general, and the one of the questions I wanted to ask you, I'm glad you brought it up, was your plans with this graduate degree in psychology that I'd read you had been working towards, and I'm guessing you're done with that now. Is that correct?
No,
you're still working.
Only about a quarter of the way in.
Okay,
Yeah,
right on. So,
yeah.
What are your? I'm curious to. I would love to know what your, I guess, your journey to getting to that spot where you decided, this could be something that I'm interested in. Because I mean, I'll share mine after you're done because I'm in a similar place. But I'd love to hear what kind of tripped that for you, that flipped that switch that
sure,
turned you onto it.
Yeah. Well, I was leaving the fire department. I worked at a fire-based service. I really wasn't my choice. So I had PTSD, developed PTSD in 2014, and then new symptoms started coming up a couple years ago that really affected my memory. And I wasn't to the point where I wasn't able to remember protocols. I wasn't able to remember, drug dosages. So it started to affect my job. So I took myself off and I'm like, hey, I need to get fixed. Mm-hmm. And then through that process, the psychologist said, no, you're done. You're not going back on the ambulance. I'm like, great. What am I going to do now?
Right.
So I had a whole team of people that helped me kind of get back on track with my mental health, which was great. And then I kind of had to decide, what am I going to do next? And through the Dan Sundahl work that I was doing, and just by sharing my own story of post-traumatic growth with everybody, of getting, having PTSD and suffering the symptoms of that, but recovering and actually becoming something bigger and better than I was before my trauma through the process of recovery, was something that I was sharing, and it was really rewarding for me. So I wanted to do something that was still helping people, and this way specifically my fellow emergency workers. And I thought this was a good career path for me. It's something I'm as passionate about as I was when I first started learning to become an advanced care paramedic. Mm-hmm. Like I'm reading over and above the textbook work that I have to do. I'm doing extra reading because I'm just so interested in it. Mm-hmm. And of course, as I'm reading stuff, I'm analyzing myself. I'm like, oh, this is what's happening to me. Oh, okay, that makes total sense. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is what happened to me when I was a kid, and this is why I was potentially predisposed to this. And so I find it really, really interesting. And I do think because of the experiences that I have, and I love to hear that other emergency workers are going into similar fields where they can they can pair the education that they're receiving, but probably more importantly, the lived experiences that they have,
Right.
to translate that into people that are needing help from someone that's been there, that is now educated on how best to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that really resonates with me. So I'm really excited about it. So that's kind of how I switched over. It was just something that felt right for me to do.
Yeah. And I have shared my whole PTSD journey in one of our earliest episodes, but the thing that had kind of triggered me was it was such a weird experience, because here I am going to therapy, just wanting to get better, because the symptoms were so intrusive, and they weren't something that I could control, which was very scary. And then feeling like I almost felt fraudulent going back to work, in a lot of ways. Like I had all these, emotional, mental, physical symptoms going on, and I'm also fighting these like internal battles of, is this normal? Should I be stronger than this? Like, why is this thing so? It was so all over the place, and so I'm asking myself all these questions, and I'm going to therapy trying to work through them all. And I remember my therapist Tim telling me that he was going to work through a couple of treatment modalities with me that he thought I'd benefit from. And so he put me through EMDR, and it was absolutely life-changing, to the point where I remember it was the third or fourth session that we had done, and I I remember walking. He actually he hosts firefighters and police officers at his house. He has a home office attached to his home, and I remember walking out of his home into the driveway to get in my car, and it felt like I'd instantly lost about 25 pounds. Everything just felt lighter. Like I remember feeling like this. They always say like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. It truly felt like my head was lighter. It felt like there was nothing pushing me down,
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't realized how tense I was for so long. And that was feeling that amount of relief was really the first, I guess, moment that I had where I was like, okay, this is really interesting stuff. I might want to do something in this field. I don't know what, but and it kind of started the thought process in my head. And then, it is kind of strange being in the room with Dan and Holly, because you guys have been such an encouragement in pursuing, a master's degree in clinical mental health, which is what I'm currently doing, Daniel. And
Okay.
It's been awesome to work through so much stuff that we have from, that's the baggage from the calls we go on to really.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like when I go to school, it's my own therapy.
It is.
Okay, well, this is when we do our online classes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, wow, this is, even though it's not specific, the program line isn't specific to emergency workers or even trauma.
Yeah.
But it's, I feel like it's like therapy class when we do our online session, class time. Which is great.
And you brought up
a lot of self-analyzing.
Yes, a ton of self-analyzing and a lot of self-reflecting. And I know that one of the things that intrigued me the most about grad school so far has been attachment disorders, because you brought up early childhood issues. And one of the most powerful moments I've had in class, we're sitting listening to this lecturer, one of our professors give a class, and she made some comment. We were doing a case review, and we're talking about this this lady's issues, and she was in like her 50s, I think, and I don't remember exactly what all the details around her case were, but our department director had continued to go over her childhood, and she just kept hammering on the first few years of her life and what she was experiencing. And there was a fellow student who raised her hand and was like, okay, but she's an adult now. Can't we can we get over some of the kid stuff? Like, can we move on? And I'll never forget the way that my teacher almost snapped at her a little bit, but it was a very quick return of of a response. And she said, 80% of the brain development happens in the first 5 years of life. You need to continue. You need to consider spending just as 80% of your first few sessions with them going over childhood, because it can be so detrimental and so helpful to us as clinicians to understand what they're actually going through and why they develop these patterns. And it was fascinating thinking about that, because we want to just write it off. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, okay.
Grow up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know? And it's like, well, maybe they can't, you know?
I really appreciate.
What's really interesting, if you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I really appreciate
Go ahead.
when you were speaking about when you first went in thinking you were alone or you were the only one feeling this way, and you look around to your coworkers and they all seem fine. And Steve, you had said that same exact thing. And by doing your art and putting it out there, being brave enough to put it out there for at least your close friends to see, it really brings so much light to the fact that we're all secretly suffering, but nobody wants to say it. I know that it's getting better in EMS. I think as paramedic schools are changing and mental health is becoming more of a focus, I hope that the new kids coming out of school and coming up in EMS will have it differently than we did. But nothing was spoken about at all about our own mental health. And nothing was really talked about taking care of people with mental health issues.
No.
And so I just really commend you for putting your artwork out there to start this conversation, because I know that for all of us, it's been hard to at least tell one person. And then suddenly you find out, oh, there's actually like a handful of people I know that are suffering too and seeking out mental health. And
thank you.
Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And I do genuinely appreciate that when I hear my peers say that, because, the artwork is very personal. And sometimes I'll create something, I'm like, there's no way people are going to understand this. There's no possible way that other people are feeling this way. And those are the ones that seem to really hit with people, because they're feeling the same way. And then they see this image that accurately portrays this complex idea of what they're feeling, which is so personal to them. And then it's shoved in their face on their phone if they're scrolling through. And it's quite shocking. So it's, for me, when I hear fellow emergency workers say what my artwork means to them, or when they get it tattooed on their body, which happens all the time, which just blows my mind.
Wow,
that's cool.
That really solidifies that I'm not alone, and it really validates what I'm doing. Right? And for me, I think for a lot of us, that's suffering from trauma. The validation part and understanding is a big deal. So that's what I get when I hear my peers comment positively on my artwork. And sometimes I do this. It happens as well when it's not so positive, because then I understand that the artwork has kind of forced them to kind of see stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And for people like you and Steve to go into the field of helping people on the other side of this with lived experience it's amazing. I would love to go to a provider that has EMS experience, that actually, when I say, here's my story, they feel it too. They can relate. So. Yeah.
And even in our class, we were talking, I think it was about on attachment. We're discussing attachment and, with addictions, which I found really interesting, with addictions and substance abuse at earlier ages, of how much more prevalent it is in people that have had, attachment issues younger, I think within first 7 years of their lives.
Right.
How more prevalent it is for them to develop addiction problems, and also for them to seek out professions where they're caring for other people, right? Which is, wow, that's like ding, 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 ding. That's a lot of us.
Kidding.
It's really, when I was talking to my professor about that, and we were discussing something about a first responder, and they were talking about, it's time for you to leave. You should just quit. I'm like, yeah, if you tell that to most of us, we're just going to snap at you.
Yeah.
Because that's our identity. Like if we start talking about identity, and how, literally, some of us would rather stay in that profession until we die by suicide instead of leave and become basket weavers. Like that,
Right.
that's what happens because we just can't imagine leaving a profession that, even though it's killing us, because we're attached to it so much of that being our identity. It's really interesting pathology, really, I think.
And maybe even being kind of addicted to that stress cycle of, that dopamine hit you get, the norepi and epi that comes down when you get that call. Even if you don't feel it anymore, we're still getting that rush of adrenaline. And I think some of us feel addicted to that. So then if you have a normal job, it feels boring and you couldn't stand just sitting there with your thoughts, sitting at a desk all day long.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah, and I don't know many emergency workers that would be able to transition to that type of work. But to have a therapist that understands that and that can broach the topic of, maybe a career change in a more informed way. I think that's something we don't really, I haven't learned in school yet, specifically for emergency workers, and I don't think we would.
Right.
But that's something I just know. I just know that through lived experience, and I know that's what we're like. And for my future clients, if that's going to be something that has to happen, then I'm going to be very careful in broaching that subject and navigating that with them.
Oh, 100%.
Because I know how sensitive of an issue that's going to be, right? Versus someone that maybe isn't. They're like, well, why don't you just quit? Why don't you just leave? Why?
Right.
I don't understand. Why are you staying in this position that, is causing you so much trauma and so much damage? Why don't you just find another job? So, well, because this is who I am. It's like you're telling me to be another person. I can't be another person. This is who I am.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's very complex, but I think having lived experience is very, very, very valuable for and anyone that's seeking therapy, I would highly recommend. And luckily, there's a lot more people out there that are getting into that profession. So there's more and more options out there. But if you can find somebody that has a past experience in emergency services, any emergency service, I think that would be a huge benefit to your recovery, I think, my opinion.
And simply leaving your profession isn't going to help.
Right.
It's just going to manifest in other ways if you don't deal with what exactly it is that is causing you to be triggered or causing this PTSD response. And then those of us that are in the business and have found ways, like through the resiliency training or through EMDR, you want to shout it from the rooftops,
right? Like something that works.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so then you get this other passion of trying to educate your coworkers and other providers on what's happening to us.
And I don't want to get I don't want to for other therapists that don't have lived experience. There's also a lot of therapists that specialize in emergency services workers, right? So they've seen thousands of, so they know. So if you can't find someone that's actually worked it, then find someone that's
culturally
that has experience with, right?
Yeah,
exactly. So talking back about the EMDR.
Yeah.
And I'm I've heard that so many times of people that it's literally saved their lives. Interestingly, and people who advocate for EMDR hate when I say this. Don't get me wrong. I am an advocate I am a huge supporter of whatever works for you, and that includes EMDR. My therapist, when I was going through my treatment, would not do EMDR on me because they said it wasn't best practice. And I'm like, what? I'm like, I know hundreds of people, because you are somewhat re-traumatized where you have to relive that experience.
Yeah.
But they said that it wasn't best practice. And Steve, that could be a whole other podcast of what best practice means. And research based, and there's a lot of controversy even over that. But so they didn't, because I thought for sure I was going to get it. I thought for sure I was going to do EMDR. And the places I went to is like, we can't do it because we don't, it's not best practice. And I'm like, oh, that's really surprising.
Yeah. I took
I didn't even have that option.
I took it was actually an EMDR class for paraprofessionals where they teach you the first 3 steps of the EMDR process that you can help lead groups through. So it's not individual counseling as much as it's helping people work through some of the first initial stages with basically just doing some exercises to help the brain process the traumatic things that have just been seen or experiences that have just been had. And we talked a lot about why EMDR works and why some people have found that it's really not for them. And we had this therapist who's been doing EMDR for probably 20 years, and she mentioned that there's population groups that they're just starting to show information on that you shouldn't do EMDR on, and one of them is veterans. If you can't do, and there was some triggers in there for why you would or wouldn't do that, but if you have like a veteran who is in EMS and you're trying to work through some stuff that they've seen on a call, but you haven't gone back to the core issues that were caused by their time in infantry or whatever else they were doing, you're basically just going to be bringing stuff to the surface and not fully processing it, and then they can feel almost more on edge because it hasn't been appropriately processed. And so it was really interesting to hear their take on why some therapists don't support it or have moved away from doing it. And it came back to a lot of it finding that the counselors who were doing it incorrectly were too quickly approaching the surface level trauma, and they weren't getting to know their client well enough to understand that stuff that happened when they were a kid that perpetuated, that was basically perpetuated when they went on that call and saw whatever they saw. But yeah, I agree. It's not for everybody. It's absolutely something that needs to be teased out in therapy to see if it's actually a good option.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. It has to be something specific if it's to the client, to your client, right? If that's going to be something useful for them versus blanket statement of, no, it's not supported, or it's not best practice, or it's not. But it might be for me,
right?
But it may be like, so let's get into it to see and analyze it. And another part is, there's a lot of difference between a veteran who maybe he didn't go back into emergency services or isn't being re-traumatized, versus, a paramedic who has PTSD who's still working, and you're trying to, as you're trying to recover, treat trauma, they're experiencing more trauma at the same time, because they're going to work every day. So yeah, it's really interesting. What do you guys know about the ACE scores?
Yeah.
I don't know very much about it. I probably shouldn't even brought it up, but I know very little about it.
The ACEs study
was
adverse childhood
direct
experience.
precursor to suicide, obesity.
So could you review
multiple
that for
health
me?
problems.
Right?
Yeah. So there's a big study they call the ACEs study, and ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And people originally thought an adverse childhood experience was something that was major, right? Like you had to witness someone being murdered, or you had to be molested or raped or something like that. But they've actually found, the more they've researched it, that an adverse childhood experience can even be something as small as being in a house where someone yelled a lot,
Right.
And the trauma we experience is so subjective, and there's some things, right? Like it would be traumatic for anyone to watch someone be murdered, right? We can all agree on that. But the way that our bodies respond and bounce back from that is going to depend on the number of other ACEs we've been exposed to, as well as our own lived experiences. And so I believe and I could get the actual number incorrect, but when they polled people in prison, like I think the average person has somewhere around 2 ACEs when they're growing up.
Yeah.
But like the prison population tends to have closer to like 7. And so
what's your top score?
I don't think there is a top score.
Oh, really?
I mean, I think it's as many as you've been exposed to.
I think it's, I don't know too much about it, but I believe it's a fairly simple questionnaire. And at the end you have a number, right? If your number is below this, then you are less likely to develop severe effects of trauma. If you have a number above this amount, then, which is really significant now when we think about people coming into the profession, or where potentially they could do an ACE score before, and God, I hope they wouldn't use that as a determining factor whether or not you get hired or not. But I can see organizations doing it, but I can totally see organizations doing pre-testing, which may not be so bad. I don't know. It's kind of that's a touchy, potentially controversial subject right there. But and again, I don't know very much about it, but with the ACE score, basically you get a number after answering these few questions.
Yeah.
And based on your number, it's scary how predictive and accurate it is. I believe that there's a study done where they surveyed a bunch of firefighters, I believe it was in California, and they did their ACE score on them just randomly, and they found that a lot of people in emergency services have high ACE scores. So even if based on your childhood experiences, then you're more likely to seek a profession like firefighting or law enforcement, which ironically puts them in a susceptible position to experience more trauma. Kind of like a messed up, someone made a mistake there, but it's very interesting.
It is interesting because if you think about like all the people you've worked with over the years, we're kind of a special breed of person. That we're all sort of drawn to this environment, and it does kind of make sense if we're all sort of predisposed to do something in this arena. Why we all get along so well.
Yeah, I'm looking at
that's also why we're so good at it.
Right.
I think it's why we're so good at it as well. So it's not all. I think it's because of those adverse childhood experiences. That's what makes us great emergency workers in those emergency situations at the same time.
How is that at your department or your old department? The attitude towards people who have experienced traumatic experiences. I know early on it was just kind of, we look at you and don't say anything to him. He's crazy. He's he had that call. We had that in our department. Now it's like we've got, I think, 8 people out on PTSD. The department of about 400.
Well, I'm lucky that I get to travel around the world and speak with thousands of our peers. And I speak with many chiefs and many senior leadership. And I've never spoken to senior leadership or chief that said that mental health was not a priority for them. Nice. They all say it's a priority. They all do. However, I also speak to the frontline workers, and I say, hey, I spoke with the chief and senior management here and leadership, and they're telling me that mental health is a priority for them. Good. And rarely is that translated to the frontline workers.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah. I know that one of the things that we've experienced with our own department is it's something that the department wants to put out to the public, like, hey, we care about mental health and we care about our people and we're supporting them in this way. And then when it comes down to it, as the person who's literally in charge of the budget for that section of our department, I can promise you that a lot of stuff gets put in place of, actually when it comes time to put things in play. And
I agree. I think go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to define for people. I'm looking at the CDC website, the ACEs study and we'll link to it in the show notes. But the adverse childhood experiences are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood. ACEs can include violence, abuse, and growing up in a family with mental health or substance use problems. Toxic stress from ACEs can change brain development and affect how the body responds to stress. ACEs are linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance misuse in adulthood. However, ACEs can be prevented. 61% of adults polled had at least one ACE, and 16% had 4 or more types of ACEs. Females in several racial and ethnic minority groups were at greater risk for experiencing 4 or more ACEs, and many people do not realize that exposure to ACEs is associated with increased risk for health problems across the lifespan. So then they have some pretty crazy data points. Preventing ACEs could reduce a large number of health conditions, up to 21 million cases of depression, up to 1.9 million cases of heart disease, and up to 2.5 million cases of obesity could basically vanish if we started putting some more attention into these areas. But Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, it's a very powerful study and test that people can, or survey people can take, and I think it's really telling based on those, well, just based on the stuff that you're saying. But getting back to the, if I can, getting back
Yeah.
to the organizations and mental health, I think it's, in my experiences, one of the reasons is that many organizations just don't know how to do it. They want to do it, so I don't want to, poo-poo on their parade too much.
Right.
I will a little bit, but sometimes they just don't know. They don't have the resources. They don't have the guidance to, okay, well, how do we support our mental health? We don't know, but hey, there's a thing that we can do. Road to mental readiness, like an R2MR course. So let's do that. Yeah, let's put that in. We'll do that weekend course. At least we're doing something.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them, they don't know what they're doing, so they don't really have the guidance. But then the other part is that they do know and they just don't care, which is the really sad part. Or they just don't have, it's not a priority. They say it's a priority because politically that's the correct thing to say.
Right.
Correct.
However, we don't have enough room. We have too many other things to do. We have too much stuff on our plate to deal with that, and we just don't have time.
It's
I think
that
what's
one
going to have
thing.
to happen.
It does have to happen, and I think that the problem is, if I'm thinking from some of the maybe dinosaur management type of shoes, is I don't want to pour time and energy and money into that topic, because it's really going to affect the way that we move forward, having to do so many different I guess different things to address the issue, because it's not a small task, and you start to unpack something that's just hasn't been addressed for years,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to be dealing with everything that you get.
And
But the truth is, they're already dealing with it, right? They're already
Right.
dealing with it in the form of retention and sick time.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different indicators that are affecting their bottom line. That it would be better off for them if they put that attention in, than so many other sectors of their ledger would improve. Sexual harassment will go down. There's so many studies that show the benefits of doing that. It's just making that happen. And I think, unfortunately, what's going to have to happen is the government's going to have to step in and say, hey, look, Bob the firefighter died of suicide in your department. We're going to come investigate your department. And if we determine that it's because of a psychologically unhealthy work environment, you are going to be liable for a workplace fatality.
Yeah.
your government, maybe, not ours.
Yeah.
No,
But
I don't think that's not happening anywhere. That's not happening anywhere yet. But I think that is what's eventually. I think there's a little bit of stuff happening in Australia that's kind of leaning toward that, and maybe even in the United Kingdom with their dedication to mental health commitment letter that they did last year. But so I think that's going to be coming down the pipe, and unfortunately, I think that's what's going to have to happen.
Yeah, and it takes
organizations.
most of our passions come from personal experiences, and this is a passion of a lot of, I think, people that have been in the career for a long time, that or maybe have one foot out the door and have taken notice that this is a huge problem among everybody, including the younger people coming up. And the people that are making the rules are in a different space in their life. Maybe they're disconnected. Maybe they don't see the importance of it. They're not living it every day. And that's when it sits on someone's desk.
Right.
So it's good
Yeah,
for...
it needs a paradigm shift. It's really a big paradigm shift needs to happen. And those don't happen overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. So Daniel, as we kind of start to wrap up our show, can you give our listeners some ways that they can find you, find more about your art, find out more about what you're doing and where you're speaking?
I'm going to be in Minnesota in a couple weeks. I'll be speaking at an event there, the Department of Corrections, which is great because I don't think corrections officers get enough attention that they deserve.
Totally.
And then I'm going to be in Halifax. I'll have a mini exhibit in Halifax, and I'll be the keynote speaker at an event there the week later. And then, I'll be at EMS World in New Orleans this year, and then I'll be in North Carolina and Michigan later this year. On my website, I list all the places that I'm going to be.
And what's that website for everybody listening?
Out here in Western Canada. It's dansunphotos.com. So DANSUN photos.com.
Perfect.
And then on the top, no events, and it has all the places I'm going to be. And I love doing that because then I get to be face to face with my peers and talk to them about this kind of stuff. Which, God, I could talk about this stuff all day.
I know. I feel you.
I
on
believe it's
that.
only been an hour.
Well, when you say
Yeah.
when people say a picture says 1,000 words, it's
Oh.
very true, especially in the case of your art.
Mhm.
It speaks to people in a way that I don't think words can speak to people. So
Yeah.
thank you for putting that out there.
Holly, was it
Yeah, and
Dallas?
again, I genuinely appreciate it.
Was it Dallas that you and I were in when Scott did this
Mm-hmm.
and had his stuff at the end?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I
Yeah,
was
we
not
did
ready
a-
for that.
We did a 3-day long like organizational resiliency class, and you get real vulnerable there in the class. It's full of police, EMS, and firefighters. And at the end, they did play this montage of some of your painting or some of your artwork, and
Oh yeah,
there
both
was
are
not a
emotional.
dry eye in the room.
I was not ready for that at all.
I wasn't ready for it either. It basically summed up why we were there for 3 days.
Yeah.
Because this is what we all experience and go through silently most of the time.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, some of those things people put those together. So some of those aren't the ones that I actually put together. But I think it's also, which is great, like it's fantastic that happened, and I hope it helps in some way. But I think it's also important. I like the term being tragically optimistic. It's great, I think, to acknowledge, the tragedies in our life and to process, to look at them and to process them, to recover from them. But I think the important part is the recovery part. So I don't, earlier on when I started going to a lot of mental health conferences, those people would go up there and like, yeah, I'm a firefighter. I developed PTSD. I tried to kill myself. My life sucks. Thanks for listening. Right. And by the end of the day, you're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I feel like shit.
Right.
It's so sad. Right. Versus, okay, well now what are you going to do about it? Like it's important to acknowledge that, which is great. But I think like the real takeaway is, okay, well, great. Now we've acknowledged it. Now what can we do to get better? I
right.
think that's an important point to include when we talk about the realities of what we do and we process the stuff. Okay, well, what's for me it's artwork, but for other people it could be wood carving, it could be hunting, it could be, what are you gonna do to interrupt that HPA access and prune those pathways and develop new neural pathways to recover and become better than you were before, to enter that stage of post-traumatic growth where you've not only recovered, you're not only resilient, you've actually become better because of the new pathways that you've developed. And that's really exciting.
It is.
Right? So I think it's important to acknowledge being tragically optimistic, but also to get into here's what can happen if you do the work.
Well, Daniel,
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate you guys having me on your show. It's
yeah,
great.
no, thank you so much for, again, what Holly was saying, for doing the work you do and for keeping the conversation going and for helping to reduce the stigma with mental health. It's, I think it's paying dividends, and your artwork is saving lives. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate that, genuinely.